The third episode of Doctor Who's 60th anniversary celebration, The Giggle, did something the show had never done before, a bi-generation. The Doctor has always regenerated whenever one actor gives way to another, but it's always a direct change, one to another. The Giggle split the Doctor into two, one David Tennant's 14th Doctor and the other Ncuti Gatwa's 15th. And as you can bet, fandom responded to this very rationally and with an open mind. Just kidding. They lost their f***ing minds. But the Doctor's the same person each time. There's not two separate people. Time Lord biology doesn't work that way. Why did this never happen before? The Doctor's regenerations are sacred and unchangeable. No, they aren't, folks. In fact, I'm gonna say something pretty controversial. Regeneration in Doctor Who has never been the same.
You never know what you're gonna end up with.
What? Yeah, any of the times it happened. Why should it be different now? Let's take out of the equation the fact that the show is fictional and Time Lords aren't real. Even within the context of the show, it's mainly suggestion based on what makes for good drama at the time. As long as Doctor Who has had regeneration rules, it's been looking for ways to break them. Join me now, won't you, for a look at all of the Doctor's regenerations on Doctor Who, and how getting bent out of shape about this one is a fool's errand. This is my new TARDIS. Do you like it? I wanted to make sure it looked exactly like the Nerdist set. That was my choice. My TARDIS specifically goes back to look at old British television shows and needlessly complicated lore.
How so, Keeper?
It's a bit limited, I'll grant you, but perfect for making videos. So, let's take a look back at how Doctor Who handled this thing we call regeneration. First, we need to set our TARDIS controls to October 1966. Beep, boop, 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 beep, boop, beep. Ah, yes. Look how much better I look in black and white. October 1966 began the serial The 10th Planet, the second serial of Doctor Who's fourth season. Seasons back then were a bit, shall we say, amorphous. For instance, season 1 premiered November 1963 and ended September 1964. Season 2 began only 6 weeks later, so there were a lot of episodes. The first 3 seasons encompassed 126 episodes. First Doctor actor William Hartnell wasn't even the first Doctor at the time, he was just the Doctor.
Hey, Doctor, you've got the most fantastic wardrobe.
Yes, well, I'm glad you approve, my child.
Hartnell wasn't ancient by any means, having turned 58 in the middle of season 3, but the new producers were concerned about how many lines he was messing up in what was essentially a live-to-tape recording every week. There's also a lot of evidence to suggest the producers at the time just didn't like William Hartnell, but the show itself was still popular, so they didn't want to just end it. But how do you replace the lead actor for whom the damn show is named? One idea in season 3 was to just change the actor. Hey, he's an alien. The show's science fiction. And the story The Celestial Toymaker, remember that for much later, presented an opportunity for the godlike trickster to just make the Doctor look different for lulz, I guess. However, that gimmick is something you can only realistically do once. Cut to The 10th Planet, the story that introduced the Cybermen, and which Hartnell already sat out 2 full episodes. At the very end of the 4th episode, once the Cybermen have to go change their head socks or whatever, the Doctor wanders away from his companions, appearing in a lot of discomfort. He mutters something about his old body wearing thin. Annoyingly, episode 4 is one of the many still missing episodes from the archives, but thankfully someone at least had the forethought to save the actual moment. What's really interesting about William Hartnell's transformation into Patrick Troughton is how sparse and inexplicable it is. The TARDIS groaning sounds plays over it, and the visuals flash in and out. It's not entirely clear what's even happening, or even that the TARDIS itself isn't causing the transformation. As the next story begins, this new Doctor acts very fishy, and the companions aren't even sure it's still the Doctor. Is this a natural thing? Is this a biological function? Is playing the recorder something in one's DNA?
No.
But let's see how Patrick Troughton's second Doctor fares at the end of his era. Setting the TARDIS controls now up a little bit to June 1969. Nice. Beep, boop, beep, boop. The second Doctor's era had continued on with ups and downs, but mostly downs in the ratings department. Doctor Who wasn't the ratings juggernaut it had been during the peak of Dalek Mania, but it also wasn't a flop, so as happens, a change was needed. Troughton himself was burnt the fuck out, having worked effectively a whole school year every season, 40 plus episodes a year. That is so many episodes. But how do you do it again? How do you make it so your alien character keeps having to change their face every few years? At the end of season 6, Troughton's final season, the wheels were coming off the production cart a little bit. So much so that the final serial, The War Games, just kept ballooning as they were making it in lieu of any other usable scripts. It went from 4 episodes into the eventual 10 episodes, the second longest single serial in the show's history. It also happens to be one of the best, in the humble opinion of me. Partway through the serial, as the Doctor finds himself in a continual fight against a race of aliens staging elaborate period-accurate Earth wars, he meets a character called the War Chief, who turns out to be another member of the Doctor's race.
You may have changed your appearance, but I know who you are.
Now, there'd been other Doctor-like aliens on the show before, including his granddaughter Susan and the meddling monk. However, with the War Chief, we learned for the first time the name of the Doctor's race, the Time Lords.
We are two of a kind.
We most certainly are not.
We were both Time Lords. We both decided to leave our race.
Despite running from them since the show began, things got so bad that the Doctor had no choice but to signal to the Time Lords to intervene, giving himself up in the process. The Time Lords put him on trial for the horrible crime of helping people, and so decide to exile him to Earth, removing his ability to fly the TARDIS and forcing his face to change.
For that reason, you will be sent back to that planet
Oh, good.
in exile.
Weirdly, he seemingly has a choice in the matter, taking a look at some wildly crude drawings of ugly people before floating off to parts unknown. The Time Lords don't say, "You're going to regenerate, a thing we do all the time." Rather, they say,
Your appearance has changed before, it will change again, and that is part of the sentence.
You can't just change what I look like without consulting me!
Unlike the 10th planet, we don't actually see the second Doctor turn into the third Doctor, which gave rise to the popular Season 6B theory, which I don't want to talk about here. And once again, it's not clear if this is a thing that his body can do normally and they're just forcing it, or if it's a punishment that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Setting the TARDIS controls to January 1970. Ba-doop-a-deep-a-doop-a-doop-a-deep. Ah, color. Groovy. Loads changed by the time the series came back. The seasons were 25 episodes rather than 44. The production changed from black and white to full color, if you had a TV that could play color, that is. And the Doctor was now Jon Pertwee.
That's not me at all.
The choice to exile the Doctor to Earth necessitated a regular cast of characters, and the Doctor working as a scientific advisor to UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, basically a military version of the X-Files. Pertwee spent an unprecedented 5 years as the Doctor from 1970 to 1974, but that was still far fewer episodes than either Hartnell or Troughton. I love the Third Doctor era, with its James Bond-esque gadgets and fight scenes and fascinating eco-monster tinges. During this period, the show introduced a number of important concepts, including the Doctor's nemesis, the Master, the first multi-Doctor story, and giving us the name of the Time Lord homeworld, Gallifrey. As much as I adore the Third Doctor era, his final season is not the best. Despite introducing GOAT companion Sarah Jane Smith, it ends with a bit of a whimper.
You have beaten us, Doctor. It is good that you will die.
The story Planet of the Spiders has a weird and kind of ill-judged riff on Tibetan Buddhism, including multiple white actors in yellowface. Not great. The big shit of it all is that they're a Time Lord. In fact, the Doctor's mentor from back on Gallifrey. Both the monk Kanpo Rinpoche and his apprentice Cho-Ji are actually the same Time Lord character, using a kind of astral projection of their future self. It's so strange and bad. The Doctor's actual death scene, however, is awesome. After sacrificing himself to save the planet Metibulus 3 with its irradiated geology, he falls out of the TARDIS at unit headquarters and passes away after a touching moment with Sarah Jane.
Now don't cry.
And then, goddammit, that racist-ass monk character appears and helps the Doctor jumpstart his change. This is the first time we hear the word regenerate in relation to Time Lords changing. I don't really want to show these offensive portrayals, so we're going to have this fun cartoon over it.
He is a Time Lord. I will give the process a little push and the cells will regenerate. He will become a new man.
Literally?
Of course, he will look quite different.
It's still not entirely clear whether this means it's something all Time Lords do or just something Time Lords can do. Either way, this time, with the lamest fade of all time, Jon Pertwee turns into What's New Pussycat singer Tom Jones. He kind of looks like Tom Jones there. No, of course it's Tom Baker! The googly-eyed, scarvid, curl-sporting weirdo who would redefine the role of the Doctor. Immediately, Baker went from Pertwee's rebellious aristocrat to a full-on alien. And in keeping with his alien status, the show started to define and adopt a lot more Time Lord mythology. Let's set our TARDIS circuits now to November 1976. In the now classic story, The Deadly Assassin, the Fourth Doctor returns to Gallifrey in order to foil an assassination plot against the Time Lord President. I know what you're thinking. Aren't all assassins deadly? Yes. Along the way, the Doctor discovers it's the Master, decrepit and decaying at the end of his life cycles, trying to utilize the Gallifreyan Citadel's mystical Eye of Harmony to give him a new set of regenerations. One of the Doctor's allies, Castellan Spandrel, says after a Time Lord's 12th regeneration, nothing can save them. This was, in no small way, massive. Now, in fairness to writer and script editor Robert Holmes, it seemed highly unlikely at the time the Doctor would ever need to worry about this. Since we live in the future, though, we know the show had a further 13 years, followed by a break, and then a further 19 years. Could have been a throwaway reference, but it saddled Doctor Who with storytelling limitations that future writers would have to try to figure out how to deal with.
Well, you'll just have to adjust the truth again, Cardinal.
If you want proof that Holmes was probably just talking out of his ass, let's go back 10 months to January 1976. Woo! In the previous season story, The Brain of Morbius, the Doctor encounters the brain of a renegade evil Time Lord named Morbius, whose body was ravaged by time.
Morbius.
In a riff on Frankenstein, a mad scientist cobbles together a monstrous body from alien parts for Morbius's brain to operate. It's a pretty rad story. During the climactic mental duel between good and evil, we see Morbius's previous incarnations, and then when it cuts to the Doctor, we see his 3 previous incarnations followed by a series of images of people we've never seen before, implying pre-Hartnell Doctors. So, is Tom Baker the 4th or like the 8th Doctor? Also, Brain of Morbius was ghost-written by Robert Holmes, and Holmes himself is one of the faces in the montage. So did he think nobody would notice? Well, it's a good thing this will never be relevant again. But anyway, now we have some rules, right? We have the term regeneration, and we know how many the Doctor is supposed to have. Probably the next regeneration will be normal and have 0% weirdness.
It's the end.
So let's just check it out. Setting TARDIS controls to September 1979. Season 16 saw the Doctor get a new companion, the Time Lady Romana, played by Mary Tam.
My name is Romana Dvaratna-Lunda.
I'm so sorry about that. Is there anything we can do?
After one season, Tam didn't want to stay on the show, but rather than create a new character, they just had Romana regenerate. At the beginning of season 17, in a story I hate called Destiny of the Daleks, for seemingly no other reason than she was tired of looking like a supermodel, Romana decides to regenerate. Not because she gets killed or sick, just because she wants to. And she runs through a litany of regeneration options before settling on one. First, do each one of those count as a regeneration? Is she rinsing through her 12, or does she have a window of buyer's remorse?
Too tall. Take it away.
At any rate, she ends up like a foot shorter and played by actress Lalla Ward, who played the decidedly not Time Lady character Princess Asta in the previous story, The Armageddon Factor.
What are you doing in that body?
Regenerating, do you like it?
But you can't wear that body.
I thought it looked very nice on the princess.
But you can't go around wearing copies of bodies.
Why not? We're not going back to Atreus, are we?
No.
Well then.
Is that something Time Lords can just do now? I'd like to look like this rando person I have met one time. I sure hope that never becomes relevant. And indeed, other than the Doctor calling it out, it never does become relevant.
But get rid of those silly clothes, eh?
God, the 70s are so f***ing weird. Let's see what kind of shit we get in the 80s. Set TARDIS controls to February 1981. Ooh, that's actually kind of nice. I like that. After a whopping 7 seasons in the role, Tom Baker's scarf began to unravel for the last time. But before he left, he had 2 more bits of nonsense. His penultimate story, The Keeper of Traken, added a weird wrinkle to regeneration. His old frenemy with Benefice, the Master, returned for the first time since The Deadly Assassin, still looking skeletal and eroded, although miraculously less skeletal and eroded than previously. During the story, the Doctor meets a really nice guy named Consul Tremas, and at the end the Master shifts his essence over to Tremas and takes over his body. And Tremas, yes, anagram for Master, super big brained, has a daughter named Nissa, who then becomes a companion and has to see her dad's corpse essentially puppeted by a monster. This is truly heinous stuff. But more for our purposes, does that mean Time Lords' essences can just steal other bodies? The essence thing comes back again in the very next story, Tom Baker's last, Logopolis. It's about entropy and a planet run by meth. I will discuss it no further. Throughout the story, the Doctor and companions keep seeing this weird guy watching them who sort of looks like a tall version of E.T. when he's out of blood. Do you know what I mean? When he's out of blood? When E.T.'s out of blood. Anyway, that's what he looks like. This thing just stands around and the Doctor seems to know what it is but won't say. As the story comes to a close and the Doctor falls from a great height after defeating the Master, he says,
It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for.
Then he gestures to the white alien thing who walks over and merges with the Doctor's body, which triggers regeneration. Nyssa has the ADR line,
He was the Doctor all the time.
Hang on. So this weird ghost was a specter of the Doctor's next incarnation? Like tapping his watch? Come on, Curly, we're burning daylight here. How does this happen? Why does this happen? And how the fuck does Nyssa, who literally showed up an episode prior, know about how Time Lord ghosts work? Anyway, now we have Peter Davison's fifth Doctor. He's notable for having the first post-regenerative crisis, which is common these days.
And the regeneration?
I don't know. I can feel it isn't going to be as smooth as on other occasions.
In season 19's opening story, Castrovalva, the Doctor needs to go into the Zero Room in the TARDIS because his brain is all cockamamie following regeneration. And it must not ever get all that normal because he chooses to wear a stalk of celery on the lapel of his cricketer's costume. This is now the period of time when the people making the show were just at an age when they watched the earliest seasons of the show when they were kids. So they had or utilized a lot of lore and foreknowledge when writing the series. This is especially true in season 20, which celebrated the show's anniversary with a bevy of returning villains, including another renegade Time Lord named Omega or Omega, the snake god the Mara, and the Black Guardian, the latter of whom got a whole trilogy of stories. During the first of these, Modron Undead, we meet a dying alien named Modron, whose brain is showing. Are we gonna do anything about it? Why, just wear a hat. Anyway, Modron wants to save his people by siphoning off the Doctor's remaining regenerations, like he just keeps them in a bucket in the TARDIS. This is the problem with Regeneration Rules. Since we know how many regenerations the Doctor has left, at least at the time, there's no peril if the Doctor is about to die. They'll just turn into somebody new. So they have to come up with ways for the Doctor to either lose all the remaining regenerations, or for the method of death to be so bad that it circumvents the regeneration rule. The premise gets, I'm gonna say it, real sweaty.
That's the trouble with regeneration. You never quite know what you're going to get.
Let's jump ahead quick, TARDIS jaunt style, to November 1983 with the 5 Doctors, the official 20th anniversary special. Nobody regenerates in this story, but we do get a few notable things. First, we have the return of the character of Time Lord President Barusa, who first appeared in The Deadly Assassin. The character appears in a total of 4 stories, and a different actor plays him each time. Barusa lives on Gallifrey in the Time Lord's Citadel, and is a politician. What's he doing that's so dangerous that he has to regenerate all the time? And I refuse to believe he's doing it for vanity, because dude turns into an old white guy each time.
I shall be President Eternal and rule forever.
Also in the 5 Doctors, the mysterious villain of the piece threatens to remove the Doctor from all of time and space and mess up hither and thither. So Barusa brings in the Master and asks him to help, offering him a brand new cycle of regenerations as payment.
Regeneration. A complete new life cycle.
So wait, it's not just a limit imposed by physiology. It's an arbitrary number the people in power put on the citizens, knowing they can just give whomever they want more lives, but they don't because reasons is truly galling. ATAB, all Time Lords are bastards. So they're gonna give the Master a whole new set of regenerations, but as you remember, the Master has taken over some other dude's body. So they can just give a whole new cycle of regenerations to a thing that was never born as a Time Lord. Are we okay with this? I guess we're okay with this. Oy, oy, oy. Okay, let's jump ahead a year to the 5th Doctor's ending. TARDIS controls March 1984, 2 months before I was born. The Caves of Androzani is by many people's metric, not only the best 5th Doctor story, but among the best Doctor Who stories, full stop. It's a great one, to be sure. My preference will always be Enlightenment, but I'm a weird guy who likes intergalactic boat races for the answers to the universal mysteries. The story finds the Doctor and new companion Perry poisoned right out of the gate, and the entire saga, with different evil factions all vying for a supply of an illicit and lucrative drug made from a rare bat liquid, happens while our hero tries to save his new friend and himself. Unfortunately, he only gets 1 dose of the antivenom and saves Perry. As he starts to fully deteriorate, he says of whether he will change,
I might regenerate. I don't know.
Feels different this time.
I'm sorry, but how would you know? None of the times you've regenerated thus far have been the same. I guess it is different than having a ghost crawl into your body, so there's that. Anyway, when the Doctor sits up, he's the supremely arrogant 6th Doctor who goes through his own regenerative crisis and almost strangles Perry to death. That isn't the weird part. The weird part is actually the Sixth Doctor is played by Colin Baker, and at the beginning of season 20 in the story The Arc of Infinity, we meet a Time Lord Citadel soldier named Commander Maxwell, also played by Colin Baker.
Yes, Maxwell?
I think you should come down here, Castellan.
So did the Doctor see Maxwell and go, I'll have that one? Or is the Colin Baker look one of the pre-programmed possibilities for when it comes to regeneration? Like, is this a design or just a very specific coincidence?
Not quite what I expected.
Either way, this is never brought up by anyone on screen ever again. There's also a thing in this era where the Doctor meets a character called the Valeyard who might be an evil future version of the Doctor, and honestly the Sixth Doctor era is not my fave, so we're just gonna move along. The next few regens are pretty straightforward, let's rattle them off quickly. Lightning TARDIS! Badoop, badoop, badoop! The Sixth Doctor turns into the Seventh Doctor by hitting his head on the TARDIS console, which is, I'll go ahead and say it, stupid. The Seventh Doctor turns into the Eighth Doctor after being shot by gang members. His regeneration stalled momentarily by the drugs the doctors at the hospital tried to give him to save him. He wakes up in the morgue. It is what it is. That's in the 1996 TV movie that was on Fox, which also happens to have the Master in the form of a goo snake inhabit the body of Eric Roberts. Which part of that do you think is weirder?
I don't know who I am, but I know that you know me.
Please go away.
Then we move on to the new series, and the Ninth Doctor turns into the 10th Doctor about as down the line as we've ever had. He does something heroic to save his companion. It's too much for him. Boom, a change.
New teeth. That's weird. So where was I?
You may have noticed we didn't talk about the Eighth Doctor's regeneration. We'll get to it. Okay, so now we slow the TARDIS down and land on December 25th, 2005. 480p, huh? Thought it'd be cooler. The first proper Doctor Who Christmas special, the Christmas Invasion, finds the newly minted 10th Doctor in bed for most of the adventure, cooking after regenerating. When he finally gets up, he runs his gob and has a sword fight with a bad alien skullhead man. During the fight, the baddie cuts his hand off, but because he's still in the first 12 hours of his regeneration cycle, he grows a new one. Okay, so the Doctor's a lizard? Is he a lizard? Is that what we're saying? Now, when I was a kid and I learned that if lizards lost a tail, they could grow another one, I at the same time wondered, if the tail was removed, would the tail regrow another lizard? Why am I bringing this up? Well, as we move further up to July 2008, we get to an episode called Journey's End, the finale of Series 4 and David Tennant's third and final full-length season. So many qualifiers at this point. In the cliffhanger to the previous episode, The Stolen Earth, a Dalek zaps the Doctor in the heart and he starts to regenerate. The viewing public knew David Tennant was leaving the show, so it was a great and shocking surprise. However, the first seconds of Journey's End has the Doctor heal his wounds with the regeneration energy, or Regenergy if you nasty, and then shoot the rest of it off into his severed hand, which has been in the TARDIS in a water-filled specimen tank after Torchwood found out and Captain Jack Harkness brought it back to him. This makes the hand grow into a separate version of the Doctor, but, and this is a big thing, is a one-hearted, non-regeneratable human. All of this was basically to give Rose Tyler, who is full-on in love with the Doctor, but got banished to another dimension, a boyfriend. It's so weird. It's so weird. Fans call him the Handy Doctor. Presented without commentary. Let's move on, shall we? We move now to HD, widescreen. Boo 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 boo. Finally, some elbow room. The Doctor's actual regeneration at the end of Time Part 2 on New Year's Day 2010 has him kicking and screaming his way to being a halfway decent person and saves Wilfred Mott, the world's grandpa, by absorbing radiation into himself.
Hello.
Hi.
Then, unlike literally every regeneration we've ever seen or heard about up to this point, the Doctor begins to regenerate, but then he has the opportunity to go say goodbye to literally every major character or their great-grandchildren he met in the entire era. And then he goes back to right before Rose meets him and has a little chat with her, and then he goes back into the TARDIS and tearily says,
I don't want to go.
Dude, how much more time do you need? You literally got to backpack across the cosmos. You were on borrowed time. At any rate, there's nothing too weird about the 11th Doctor's first bit, aside from some Regenergy hiccups. But let's jump ahead to the second series, TARDIS controls set to April 2011. Boop-a-dee-ba-da. Series 6 is a whole-ass thing, which is very complicated and deals with the origins of Girl Out of Time River Song.
That's a whole different birthday.
So, Here we go. It turns out River is actually the daughter of the first married couple companions, Amy and Rory, and we learn that she can regenerate and was kidnapped as a baby and programmed to be an assassin to kill the Doctor. Why can she regenerate? Well, the show tells us since she was conceived in the TARDIS while it was traveling through the time vortex, the baby was somehow fused with Time Lord DNA. I don't even know where to start with. So all you have to do is bang in a TARDIS, join the Millennia High Club, and your baby can be a Time Lord? In episode 8 of series 6, Let's Kill Hitler, we find that the Doctor is for sure gonna die, but then River bestows upon him her remaining regenerations through a kiss. So she's a regular old human person now, but the Doctor is back to having the exact same number of regenerations he was already up to? I'm tired of talking about this. Let's move up to November 23rd, 2013, the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor. Beep boop. Hell yeah, baby. Love this story. But for our purposes, it also has some very peculiar things to say about regeneration. At the end of the previous series, the Doctor and his companion, Clara Oswald, end up within the Doctor's own time thread, and they see versions of all his previous selves. One of them is unknown to Clara, who had met all of the ones we've talked about. The Doctor says,
The other me. The one I don't talk about.
I don't understand.
The cliffhanger shows John Hurt, and it says introducing John Hurt as the Doctor. And my dudes, people lost their minds. How can this be? He's not one of the canonical Doctors. The numbering! Think of the numbering!
I've been fighting this war for a long time. I've lost the right to be the Doctor.
This was all part of the wild mix of necessity and contractual requirements Stephen Moffat, the writer, had to contend with. The new series, and especially the Moffat era, had made sure to confirm the continuity that the 11th Doctor was, in fact, the 11th Doctor. But because the presumed Doctor to fight in the Time War, the 9th Doctor, was played by an actor who did not want to return, Moffat had to figure something else out. In a brief prologue to The Day of the Doctor, the Night of the Doctor, we see the return of the 8th Doctor, who has stayed a conscientious objector to the devastating Time War betwixt the Daleks and the Time Lords, but the culmination of that short finds him on the verge of death and needing to take a stand to keep more innocents from dying. Funnily enough, he ends up on Karn, the planet from The Brain of Morbius, and the mystical sisterhood of Karn gives the 8th Doctor a potion to help him ensure the kind of iteration he gets next. He chooses Warrior, and thus we get John Hurt, the War Doctor. So I think at this point we can safely say regeneration is not a natural physical process. It seems so tied to weird rules and loopholes and patrician hierarchies that there's no way it can be. But then we get something like the final button on the 50th anniversary special. While looking at a painting in the National Gallery, a man walks up to the 11th Doctor who turns to see someone he recognizes. It's Tom Baker, but current day Tom Baker. You know, old. We find out he's playing the Curator, a man who may or may not be a future version of the Doctor going through old faces.
I never forget a face.
I know you don't. And in years to come, you might find yourself revisiting a few, but just the old favorites, eh?
The show never outright says it is the Doctor, but it's heavily implied. It's a fun way to bring in who for many is the Doctor, but it also boggles the old mind in the continuity department. Which brings us back to the 12 regeneration limit. In the very next episode, The Time of the Doctor, Matt Smith's 11th Doctor strands himself on the planet Trenzalore, protecting the town of Christmas for hundreds of years. He gets markedly more ancient, and then he explains to Clara that he's out of regenerations.
I can change 12 times, 13 versions of me, 13 silly doctors.
Okay, so you're number 11, so...
Are we forgetting Captain Grumpy? Huh?
He counts them thusly. Each regen we see from 1 through 7, then 8th to War, then War to 9th, 9th to 10th, 10th to Handy 10th.
Okay, so you're number 12.
Well, number 10 once regenerated and kept the same face. I had vanity issues at the time.
Then 10th to 11th. And he's out of regenerations therefore, apparently. Lucky for him, he finds his home planet in a crack in time, and through that, the Time Lords bestow on him a new cycle of regenerations. People were mad about this at the time. That's a get-out-of-jail-free card, a deus ex machina. A third trope that means the same thing. My response is, yeah, of course it is. Do you want the show to be over? If you never change canon, if you never think of clever ways out of painting yourself in a corner, or a corner someone else painted you in 40 years ago, then you can't keep a series going for 60 years. Feel free to stop watching and make your headcanon that the Doctor died and that we're done. But we're not done. The 11th Doctor's regeneration to the 12th is really interesting. He starts to do the thing, which by this point is set in stone. It's yellow gold glitter coming out of his hands and head, and then it's some kind of fire and he turns into the next person. Here, however, the Doctor just turns young again during this, so Maddie Smitty can deliver the final monologue without all the old age makeup.
I can't stop it now, this is just the reset. Whole new regeneration cycle, ooh.
He did, however, have to do this with a wig on, since he was bald at the time filming a Ryan Gosling movie. Anyway, once he says his excellent final line, he just suddenly pops into Peter Capaldi. It happens on a cut. It adds a layer of spontaneity the series never showed us before. The actual change isn't belabored, it's quick and frenetic. The 12th Doctor's face is something I want to discuss, too. Look at those eyebrows! No. He's played by Peter Capaldi, as I said, and Capaldi had also played a completely unrelated character several years earlier in the story The Fires of Pompeii. Now, they could have just ignored this, but Moffat chose to make it a point that the Doctor chose this face specifically because that earlier character represents saving someone even when staring down an active volcano. However, it's never clear that the Doctor chose it consciously. It seems much more like a thing in his sub-basement of a brain, which again raises the question of how in control a Time Lord is when regenerating. Is it something to do with the Time Lords bestowing on him a new cycle? The show is pretty explicit as to why the Doctor looks like Peter Capaldi, but it never really contends with how. The 12th Doctor's whole era ultimately deals with the morality of the Doctor's actions and whether or not they deserve to go on, even with the new life cycle. A Cyberman shoots the Doctor in the story The Doctor Falls, and he spends a good deal of the runtime fighting off regeneration. In the 12th Doctor's final story, Twice Upon a Time, he refuses to regenerate outright. We've seen something like this prior in the 10th Doctor story, The Last of the Time Lords, in which the Master just won't regenerate out of spite. Here, after being all, nah dog, the Doctor finds himself back where it all started, with the first Doctor about to regenerate, and he also refuses to do so. Time stops and begins to collapse as though the literal space-time continuum depends on the Doctor regenerating to keep time a-flowin'. Ultimately, the Doctors convince each other that change is good, and it also gives some context to the first Doctor's regeneration. By this time, we know roughly how regeneration works, so we don't need to pretend anymore that the TARDIS did it. This time, the Doctor changes gender presentation for the first time on screen, going from Peter Capaldi to Jodie Whittaker. Now, this was a pretty groundbreaking moment. However, to quote a previous regeneration,
"But the moment has been prepared for."
Earlier in the 11th Doctor era, we hear about a friend of his named the Corsair who had changed gender upon regeneration. Then there's Missy, of course, a female-presenting version of the Master. And just for good measure, in the story Hellbent, the Doctor shoots a Time Lord general who then regenerates from Ken Bones, an old white man, into Tania Miller, a younger black woman.
Sorry, ma'am.
Time to set the TARDIS controls again to Soapbox. Boop, boop, boop. Gallifreyans are aliens. They don't always need to look like white guys, or white women for that matter. So the show is making it clear that, canonically, there's no reason not to cast any good actor. That didn't stop a certain subset of fandom, read old, white, and male, from proclaiming that this was just the show attempting to be woke and pandering to the libs. Back in them fuzzy TV days, the presumption was that the Doctor Who fans were all male and predominantly white because the UK was and is pretty damn white. 82% Caucasian today, but well over 90% back in the 60s. Beginning with the 2005 update, as the show's appeal grew and grew, especially outside of the UK, the fandom began to represent all people who liked fun adventure stories about romance, intellect, and kindness, overcoming violence, oppression, and cynicism. And guess what? A lot of those fans are not white, not male, not het, not cis, and not binary. Casting actors who represent traditionally underrepresented groups is a vital part of storytelling. These folks have been made to connect with characters who don't represent them for hundreds of years. White dudes can learn to do that now. How can anyone claim to be a fan of Doctor Who but think the Doctor should only be and appeal to white men is so ridiculous, I don't even know what to do about it. It's the same people who claim Disney Star Wars or Paramount Plus era Star Trek are woke pandering. Newsflash, folks! Star Trek is about a science-based, inclusive utopia. Star Wars is about fighting fascism, imperialism, and conformity, and Doctor Who is about freedom to live and love as you see fit, no matter who you are or what you are. I don't make the rules, I just say very obvious things people like to ignore to excuse being bigots.
Let's go meet the neighbors.
So all of that out of the way, the 13th Doctor era is absolute buck wild when it comes to regeneration and lore. And I say lore rather than story because for the most part, the audience and the Doctor just get an infographic of the new status quo and never do anything about it. First, in the episode Fugitive of the Jadoon, the Doctor works to protect a woman named Ruth, played by Jo Martin, from being unduly captured by the intergalactic rhino police guild, the Jadoon. AJAB, you know what I mean? As the episode goes on, we eventually learn, along with the Doctor, that Ruth is a version of the Doctor in hiding who had used a chameleon arch to wipe her memory and make her human. Naturally, the Doctor assumes this must be a later incarnation because she doesn't remember this version. But the Ruth Doctor also doesn't remember the 13th Doctor. So it must be a mind-wiped future incarnation. No. Remember the brain of Morbius we talked about what feels like 6 weeks ago? The Doctor's memory showed versions of their history we never saw previously. Well, under showrunner Chris Chibnall, the show decided to make those weird images canon for real, and not just a contrivance for that story. We learned that Dr. Ruth, not the sex one, was a pre-Hartnell Doctor who worked for Division, which is basically the Time Lord CIA the government of Gallifrey used to carry out clandestine murder missions.
How did I end up like you?
You don't. You're in my future, not the other way around.
At some point, we're led to believe the Doctor's memory was fully wiped, given a new full set of regenerations, and as far as they were concerned, they were living their first life. Now, this is obviously huge revelatory stuff. If you thought the War Doctor mucking up the 1 through 11 numbering was a problem, try not even knowing what number this new one is. Is she Dr. Zero? Is she negative doctors? The 13th Doctor hardly gets time to wrap her mind around this before she gets a whole new wallop of backstory. The Master, ever the thorn in the side of things, has wiped out the Citadel on Gallifrey because he learned a fact he couldn't handle. Eons ago, a Gallifreyan scientist named Tech-Tayun found a strange child that seems to have come out of nowhere. This child has the innate ability to turn into a new person on the genetic level whenever they die. And yes, a child dies on Doctor Who.
The first regeneration of any person on the planet of Gallifrey.
Tech-Tayun then figures out a way to harness this energy and give it to other Gallifreyans to keep them alive for millennia longer than they otherwise would have been. Simultaneously, they developed time travel, so couple that with the effect of immortality, and they now become the Time Lords. Time Lord government imposed the 12 regeneration limit because who wants to live forever, as Freddie Mercury once said. The child, if you hadn't figured it out, was the Doctor.
The child is you.
Who was not only exploited for their natural resource, but forced into servitude in the Time Lord CIA, who basically used them as a winter soldier, mind-wiping and regenerating them after every mission.
I remember growing up, I remember you and me at the academy together.
That happened. It just wasn't your first life.
The amount of rewriting to lore this creates is gargantuan, not to mention it brings into question all the times throughout the years we've heard the Doctor muse about their childhood on Gallifrey.
Well, when I was a little boy, we used to live in a house that was perched halfway up the top of a mountain.
Did they turn the Doctor back into a child when Division was done with them? Because we know from the 12th Doctor story, Listen, that the Doctor was a child living in a barn at one point. We also know they grew up and went to school with the Master, so again I ask,
why would they do that?
Now I want to be very clear about something. I do not care about lore rewriting. Gotta keep the show fresh and whatever, it's fine. But this Doctor never does anything with this new knowledge. The Master has already confronted the Time Lords about it and killed everybody, unable to cope with owing his continued existence to his sworn enemy.
You can see why I'm angry.
When the Doctor finally does meet Tech-Tayun, who, by the way, trafficked her as a child and put her into forced servitude, Tech-Tayun is killed like 5 minutes later. So what was the point? And Chibnall wasn't done either. In his and Whittaker's final episode, The Power of the Doctor, the Master again does some questionable ass and he decides to ruin the Doctor's galactic reputation by forcing her to regenerate into him. I have absolutely no idea what purpose this would serve. The Doctor literally just turns into the Master, literally the same Master we'd been watching already. How is that better than just claiming you're the Doctor? Are people ever gonna check? Has that ever been a thing in the past? Tegan and Nyssa literally thought a crusty, dying alien was the Doctor because he was in the TARDIS wearing the Doctor's coat. Wouldn't it have been more interesting, perhaps, if the Master's consciousness had inhabited the Doctor's body, meaning she still looked like herself, but was now full of evil? You know, something we've literally seen the Master do twice already. And it doesn't even matter anyway, because the Doctor's companion Yaz just strands Master Doctor on a moon until they can figure out how to degenerate this being back into the Doctor. Even for this show, it is nonsense. Anyway, now that this concept is well and truly sweaty, and so am I, we get to the 13th Doctor's real regeneration. Oh, again, she's in regen mode for like weeks or whatever before actually changing. Fine, I don't care anymore. She stands on a mountain and regenerates into David Tennant?
I know these teeth.
Well, it's not unprecedented at this point. It's canonically a new Doctor, the 14th. But he's reusing the 10th Doctor's face, A, because it's for anniversary special reasons, and 2, so once and future showrunner Russell T Davies can right some wrongs with the character of Donna. And we already know revisiting faces is a thing.
And in years to come, you might find yourself revisiting a few, but just the old favorites, eh?
This honestly bothers me 0%. Which brings us finally to The Giggle, the third of the 3 Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials. After being zapped by the Toymaker, the trickster god from another plane of existence, who has powers of reality manipulation, the 14th Doctor starts to regenerate again. We've seen this a million times. Here we go, folks. This will be so normal it's not even funny. But no, he doesn't regenerate, at least not quite. He asks Donna and returning 6th and 7th Doctor companion Mel Bush to pull on his arms, and this splits him in 2, with one remaining David Tennant and the other the trouserless Ncuti Gatwa, the 15th Doctor. The show makes a point of explaining this has never happened before. It's new and unique due to the Toymaker's reality manipulation.
What?
It's not regeneration. It's a bi-generation.
Bi-generation is supposed to be a myth, but... Look at me.
There are now 2 Doctors, the former of whom is seemingly mortal. Not entirely clear he can't regenerate again, but Davis said in a commentary that it effectively makes the previous Doctor mortal and age normally. He also said the Toymaker's zap could reverberate throughout the Doctor's lives, so if he and the show wanted, any of the past Doctors could show up again, looking as old as the actors are now, and still be the Doctor. And you want to know something? I love it. I think it's genius. Why do we keep doing the same thing we've been doing for 60 years? We must evolve, especially when basically all of those previous examples was like not the same in any way. Regeneration was one of the most brilliant conceits a TV production ever dreamt up. You might be able to get away with recasting a character once and have the audience buy it. Only Doctor Who has built it into the fabric of the show. Change is the show's key to longevity, updating the cast every few years, bringing in not only new companions, but a new Doctor who is the same but not, keeps the series fresh. May Doctor Who regenerate the way it regenerates for another 60 years. Thank you very much for joining me on this history of regeneration and why it's always great, it's always weird. Please hit the like button, please subscribe for more videos, and join us again next time on another weird long video on Nerdist. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna travel back to Christmas 1989 so I can play with my Michael Keaton Batmobile before my dad breaks it. Bye, everyone.